you still don't get priority. So the purpose of this talk is I'm going to go through replacing JavaScript on a form and using Power Component Framework to do some of that. You can't do all of that with it, but you can do some of that with it. And then we're going to do a quick demonstration of one of the places where I use it, and finally show you some proper code. Going through the introduction, the world's moving towards a low-code, no-code world. Multiple reasons for that, one of which is real developers are scary and are actually very expensive. You know, to actually get a developer in, we cost a lot more money than a functional consultant does most of the time, and it takes a long time to do anything. Creating a bit of JavaScript on a form and testing it fully may take a day, easily. Worse than that, if anything changes, and as we all know, Dynamics is now updated on a monthly basis, with continual updates, anything can change which will cause your custom code to stop working. So ideally, if you can avoid writing custom code, avoid writing custom code. It also, as I said, it also requires ongoing support. You may have no choice because Microsoft changes something, either in a full release or in a partial release. They may break some functionality you are reliant on. And if you have a piece of JavaScript and someone on a form, and someone comes along and changes that form, that by itself could break your JavaScript. That does not occur if you're using business rules. If you create a business rule, the business rule, it builds in an inbuilt dependency on the form, so that when you go and update that form and say remove the field that you're dependent on, you will not be able to remove that field. And we'll get to that in a minute when we come to one of the next forms. So for page level JavaScript, there are 4 reasons why we would use JavaScript on a page. So the most obvious one is user interface. As and when we create a form, we may show and hide fields. And equally, we might mark fields as required, not required. The next one, and the original purpose for a lot of Power Component Framework is to ensure is field validation customization, which is 2 parts. You can use validation to ensure the field is valid and is in the correct format, say for a national insurance number or a national ID card number or a phone number. And also we can use it to display the data in a more appropriate way. So for instance, if you have a ratings from 1 to 5, you could use stars rather than numbers, or you can use happy faces and sad faces to reflect the, how happy the customer is. Now, the most obvious other use for JavaScript is on-page validation, which is to make sure that the data you're saving to the form is actually correct. And finally, we use it for data flow. And that is, it allows us to take data from field 1 and use the data that's presented in field 1 to populate as the basis of the data we then display in field 2. Looking at the user interface side of things, the entire purpose of this is to avoid conflict between one of the things you really want to do is avoid conflict between business rules and custom JavaScript. Ideally, nowadays you should be using one or the other. If you use both, at times they will break. Ideally, you use JavaScript because, as described earlier, there is a business rules has a built-in. Ideally use business rules because business rules has a built-in dependency checker. Once you create a business rule on a form, all the dependencies within that business rule are attached to the form. So if you then go and modify the form, say to remove the created on field, you will be given an error message saying you cannot do that. as an aside here, it is very useful if you are using business rules to always add the created on field as a hidden field in the form. Business rules will assume a value field is when you create a business rule, it will allow you to add any field that exists on the entity within the business rule. That includes entities which may not be in the form. So once you've got the business rule on the form and the entity and the bit, once you've got the attribute on the form and the business rule's there, it will stop you deleting it. What it won't do is it won't stop you creating a business rule which has got, which is using an attribute that is not on the form. So, but there's a reason why I say put created on field on the form for business whenever you're using business rules, because it makes it a lot easier to handle logic where you say this form is an update and therefore I wish to restrict these fields so you cannot change them once the form has been created, once the record's been created. Okay. Now, field validation would be the ideal solution for Power Component Framework. When the Power Component Framework appeared this time last year, and it was in May last year, I was working on a project for one of Microsoft's priority customers. European bank, they have multiple instances across Europe because the banks across Europe, and they are large enough and powerful enough that they actually have their own resource group within Dynamics. So this is a customer who pays Microsoft an awful large amount of money. They have their own resource group. They had full-on priority support, including direct access to the product team. And they also have a release schedule which differs from most other resources in Europe. Okay, that's the size of this customer. So one of the first things I came along to do was to say, okay, for this customer, we need to use the Bulgarian national ID number as the basis of the data set. Therefore, I must make sure that this field, which is for Bulgarian national ID, must have a valid national ID number in it. Straightforward request, seems very, very simple. I'll go and see if I can actually do this. So you write what is a very simple PCF component, and I go along and I do validation and everything else, and we take it into the system, and we discover that while I can validate the error message within the component itself, it does not propagate up to the page level. So you're halfway there. You've told people that the record's invalid, that the data you've entered is valid, and you need to get the complete proper national ID number. It fails because you can't continue to save the form. So, which is when the great discovery was that even if you are at that sort of level, even if you are spending that sort of money with Microsoft, it still doesn't mean you can actually get a problem in the system fixed easily. But there is an idea for it, and it's now been sat in pending for over a year. So if you like the idea that a JavaScript, if you like an idea that a PCF component could raise an error message, and that error message would be enough to stop the form from being stop the page from being saved, could you please click on that link and support the suggestion? Right. After that, the next purpose of JavaScript on a form is the logical one of page validation. Now, there are three ways of doing this. Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform itself will, in the background, check that all required fields have been populated. You don't need to do any work there. It'll do that for you automatically. If there's any custom checks you need to do, those custom checks can be done with either JavaScript or business rules. And as I said earlier, do it with one or the other. Do not do it with both because you'll end up with race conditions. Equally, if you're going to do it with business rules, that is supported with dependency checks. It is supported in other ways. The Microsoft will make sure that works correctly. Custom JavaScript is always a risk that something will break and you won't be able to support it long term. Okay, now, and as I commented, now the next point is, as I commented earlier, PCF errors aren't handled automatically, and you will need to process those separately by custom JavaScript. However, Benedict has a talk later on today where he has got the approach that works to be able to do it with PCF components. It is not incredibly straightforward because it requires a few additional steps and a few additional items within it, because it requires an additional field, but it does work. Okay, and then finally, the use of JavaScript on a page is the obvious one of data flow, which is we take the data from the first field. Say I'm going to use this as a demonstration within a few minutes, say an entity, and we populate the entity, bring the entity field into the next component or attribute, which is select the appropriate attribute on the form. So in some cases, these already exist. So they've already been built into Dynamics for child lookup forms. So if you have a parent-child relationship on, say, case subject or account, you can select your parent account, and the account below it will be filtered to show you only the accounts that belong to the parent customer. Or in case of a case type, you'll have a parent case type of inquiry, and the child case types underneath that will relate to inquiries rather than bulks. So as we continue, and then and that is from this point here, that is the basis of the rest of this talk. We are going to be focused mainly on the use of Power Component Framework object items as a means of doing data flow logic between one component and bringing the data to the next component, and avoiding all the custom JavaScript I used to have to write to do this bit of logic. Right. So now finally, a teeny bit of background about myself. I've spent the last 3 years working mainly for Microsoft. I left in August last year to become an ISV. What we are slowly focusing on is 2 areas. We're focusing on creating a simpler, cheaper version of doing customer service and sales for customers that don't require the full-on Dynamics product and just require something that's straightforward, easy, and far, far cheaper to use. Okay. Alongside that, because I want to make something that's easier to use, we're working on a pile of components that actually focus on usability, which is we have things that allow you to undo changes to records, to ensure that we can recover deleted records, to ensure you can use the same form but keep the records you can use the same form to update records, but only have the record data updated when it's been approved by a third person, and also to bring up alerts. So one of the things we're currently working on is the new global alerts functionality and making that usable so that people can actually do it without writing custom JavaScript. And one of the component I'm going to demonstrate here is currently going for app source and does exactly that. It will allow you to go and create alerts that appear either on a form level or on a global level based on just your 2 seconds of configuration. Okay. Now, everything we do is user configurable, and to do that we use custom entities. There are 3 ways of actually doing this. You could use the old-fashioned way of using a web resource, which was XML based, and you could update it. You could use the more modern way of environment variables, which are JSON based. What we use custom entities for it because that gives us user interface which allows us to do it however we want to. So it allows us to, because of our PCF components, we can do this now very, very quickly. Literally, I can usually write the configuration page on a form in about half an hour. And as I said, everything we create is based around plugins, actions, and JavaScript. So all the PCF components I'm going to demonstrate here, which are open source and readily available, the link is on this page, all those items are designed to play around with D365 Power Up metadata to allow me to bring up the configuration, which allows me to attach the appropriate plugin or JavaScript to that page. Okay, everyone happy so far? Right, so let's move on to the demos. So, right. So the first thing we have here is, this is, as I said, this is the this is the deployment environment we're using for our global alert system. The purpose of it is it allows alerts to be displayed. And so as we watch and as this will load, as you see, this is what it does. It allows you to create global alerts that appear using the new global alert functionality. It allows you to create form notifications on a form level based on the slightly older form notification functionality. Okay, there are serious annoying issues with the global alert functionality, which is, it is great. It allows you can create global alerts with it. The current functionality doesn't allow you any means of knowing if those alerts have been removed. So I can create an alert, that alert, a global alert, that alert will be displayed. If and when I, as a user, go and deleted it, there, I have no notification of that fact that it's been dismissed. Okay, and that is outstanding. I believe it's being fixed, but if you're using it at the moment and you're going to use global alert functionality, you can create an alert, you can show it, you won't know what happens to it afterwards. Okay, just an aside. So what we can do here is I can go and create a new alert. So this form has no JavaScript in it. What it has is a number of business rules, a hidden created on field, and beyond that, a number of PCF components, all of which feed from one to another. So that's the first one. Let's go and create an alert. 365. I'm sorry, I know it's changed names since, but I'm still used to it being D365 Saturday. So what I'm going to do, it's a global alert, which means it will appear up here on the top. It is a information field. It is and this has got no business logic in at all. It's just a straightforward form. Everything else, if I close this and I reopen it again, I should now come back, and as you see, we now have 3 notifications. So we have the we have the old ones that were there, do some work, the 2 outstanding tasks that I've been told about, and the new one, which is welcome to D365 Saturday. So now I'll go in, and if I create an account if I create a form level alert, this will cover everything else. So this is on the account form. And what I'm going to do is, it is a warning, and it's an entity form. Okay, so the first thing it does is, there's a business rule here which is making display form visible, and I want to display it on the account record. Okay, And I now need to put the message in, which is this account needs a contact. Moving on to the next stage, I'm going to say when this alert appears. And this alert will appear if, by checking the contact records, it's going to look against the parent company ID. It's going to look at all contacts, and it's going to appear if no records exist. Okay, and to do that, what these PCF components have done in the following order is there's a PCF component which lists entities. Okay, this one is the parent entity which controls the entity below. In fact, actually, this join attribute entity is controlled by the display entity and the query entity. So it's looking at it's got an input of those two fields, and having looked at the input of those two fields, it is then running a metadata query in the background to tell me which fields are the join relationship between these two items. Okay, it will then go into the contact, then looking again on the contact entity, and this contact entity attribute here is passed down into the view entity here, which allows me to select or generate a list of all the views that are related to the contact entity. And in this case, it's all contacts because I want to know if the contact is attached to this customer. Okay. Now, and then the final bit of this logic here is to say I only want this alert to appear if the view returns no records. Okay. And with that, it's all created. So I will do one final trick here, which is I'll go into the demo field. I'm going to open up this account record, and what we'll see as it loads up, we have a large number of entities because this was the check. This is what I've been used for testing all these items, and you see the newly created error message, which is there's no contact associated with this account. Please create one. Right. So finally, having done all the demonstrations and everything else, let's look at the code. So, as I said, I've shown you multiple views, I've shown you multiple records here, but what I want to now do is I'll now show you the PCF component for the first of those controls, which is the one which generates a drop-down list, which creates an entity, which shows you a list of entities. Okay. Now, the controller itself has two fields in it. It has two bound fields, one of which is the logical entity name, the other one is the display entity name. Okay, the display entity name one's optional here, but it's there to show you the purpose of you can use a single field to populate multiple fields of data. Okay. And this is, as I said, this is a simple PCF component. There's no logic to this at all. It doesn't use React. It doesn't use anything else because when I originally wrote these, React did not exist as an option within PCF. And now, even when it does, if you have too many PCF components that use React, there is a strong possibility that you'll end up with memory issues, because you have to reload the entirety of the React framework within each PCF component. That is a long-term project that the product team is still trying to fix. It was mentioned yesterday that we are still working on it, but for the moment, and we're working on the ability to share frameworks across multiple controls, again for memory issues, but none of that's been fixed yet. So these are really simple bits of TypeScript, JavaScript to literally do the purpose that's there, and the rendered in standard CSS. Okay, if you want to create a fake drop-down list that looks like Microsoft's out-of-the-box functionality, perhaps the CSS is available here within all these controls. Okay, so as with all PCF components, there's well, it's the only bits there is the same controls as anything else. There's the initial installation of class. There is the update view class, which is updated all the time, and there is an output. So for this control, which is the simplest one, and actually one of the first ones I think I ever wrote, the following, the init control is loaded as the page is loaded, and the logic is straightforward. So init is loaded once. When the page is loaded, that's it. In this control, in this bit, the init, you set up your logic for the control as a whole. So anything which is fixed, you set up here. So in our case, we are setting up the container. We're grabbing the container as it's presented in and storing it so that we can continue to use it as whenever we want to use it within the project. We're getting the base URL of the environment because I'm going to need it later to pull. So need it later when I pull the metadata down to display the list of appropriate entities. And we are grabbing the context and keeping a copy of the context because again, we're not, it's useful having it. Okay, after that, we're then setting up the CSS of the control. And in this case, it is a drop-down list. So we're creating a wrapper div around everything else, and then we're creating the combo box control beneath it. Okay, and in this case, that's all we're doing here. This bit of logic is required to bring the values back. So this is required so that when you change the value within the control, it triggers within the select statement, it will trigger the output class, which will then feed through to the back to the page so it knows that the page has been updated or the field's been updated and it's got a new value on it and the form is dirty. The following controls afterwards are there to reflect how the rest of the layout of a D365 component works. So, as I showed when I was there 2 seconds ago, if I go back to here, if you witness, as I click the form, what you want to do is, as you bring your mouse over, you wish for the box to appear around the control. As you click on it, you wish for this side to appear like that, and as your mouse disappears, you wish for it all to go. That is what those 3 other commands are there for. They're there literally to reflect the user interface side of things, because ideally you want your control to reflect how the rest of the page works. And as I said, when I started doing this, React wasn't available. Yes, in theory, I could use React and Office UI now, but Office UI doesn't look like Dynamics, and therefore it does cause issues for users, in my personal opinion. So, so let's go back to the PCF component as a whole. Having set up the initial control as we loaded it, and we've set up the core structure of the component. So at the moment, the page is loaded. The first time this is run, it has created an appropriate div to display it on the form, and it's created within that div the select control ready for that to be populated. That is all that we'll do here. The next stage after that is the control will call, or the page will call update view. PCF components receive update view calls continually for an awful large number of reasons. They will appear because a value you are using has been updated, which is what we're using it for. They will also appear for reasons such as I have changed the page size, something else has modified the size of this the div this control is in, and numerous other bits. Page save is one of them as well. In all these cases, this will continue to run. So when you run an update view, remember that it's going to appear more often than you expect. So don't put too much code in here, and always try to ensure you know the context, or try and identify the context in which this page has updated. Okay, or why this PCF component has been called again. So in this case, what it's going to do is we're going to load up any hidden values which are in this control, and then populate the value. In the case of this control, there are two input parameters on it. So these are loaded up here, and they're loaded every time because actually they will never change. Okay. In the case of this control, these are input controls. They're not going to be bound to any object, and they're there because there are multiple ways I may want to show an entity, which is I may only want to show entities that can have activities against them, or I may just wish to only display activity entities. Okay, so these are run like this one. You will note also here this line is disabled because if the entity is read only, this is passed in as part of the system. So I need to know if this control is going if I'm displaying this as a read only field, because if I'm going to display it as a read only field, I don't want to enable the select functionality. And we'll get to that when we come to the following bit. But so having to go this area, the next bit of logic is if a control is run the first time round, I want to read the value. I may want to read the values of the other controls. So in this case, it's not so important. In the other controls, it will come later. So in this case, here, what I'm saying is on the first run, bring in the value from page load, because the value that's passed into the control, the value that's being passed into this control is the original value from the record as it was when the page was loaded. Bring in the value, change the status so that it's not the first run, and then go and populate the drop-down list based on the criteria which are selected above here. Okay, so now the populate drop-down list is the class is called from here, and this populates the drop-down list. Okay, in this case, it's calling a promise to get the entities, which, because it's a metadata call, is a normal XML HTTP request rather than a XRM request, and it waits for the results. What I'm then doing with the results is I'm then populating them into a array of a particular class, which we then use so that we then sort the results which have come back into alphabetical order. We're doing it this way because everything will be presented back in logical order, in logical entity name from the system as a whole, which may not be representative of the language the user is using. Or even in the case of English, that's the case because incident will appear way, way further down the list than case will, and case is the display name of the incident entity. So we bring them all in here, we're sat here, and then we're going to do a bit of JavaScript logic, which is just going to tidy up the page. Okay. After that, We're then checking some logic here just to remove any old values which are appearing. And there we'll come to that. It's more important than the next one. It's not an issue here, but the same logic covers everything. And then we're going to create all the options into the form. Again, this will literally load up. So we iterate across the list. We create a select item for every form, every option which we brought in, and we're going to add them into the combo box. And we're also going to check the current value to be true. Okay, this is all done. Finally, you'll note that we have a check at the end, because if this entity is read-only on the form, you do not wish for this entity to be saved. You do not wish for this entity to be updated. And if you're not careful, a PCF component you can create a PCF component which is supposedly read-only. If you don't create it correctly, and you don't set it to be read-only, if you update the value, Dynamics is stupid enough to allow you to save the updated value. So you do need within your own PCF components to handle read-only state and make sure that you didn't process everything through here. Okay, so having got this, it's all populated. This will now mean that we've populated this entity list. Okay. And if I scroll further up, you'll note that this one, let's ignore that. Got something to fix. So, right. So we now populate the drop down. Everything else done for that one. That's it. Now, the final bit of logic here would be when I go and update a field. So I'll come here. If I update this entity here and change it, that will call the change field here, change class here. And if I scroll down to on change, you will see we're going to grab the current value here. We're going to pass it through there. We're going to set the current value to be the new value under control, and we set notify output change. When it calls notified output change, it raises a message which is passed up to the form, and that is then passed down to any controls which are dependent on this value. So what this PCF component is doing on notify change is telling the form as a whole, this value has changed. Please mark the page as dirty, and please pass this information to any other entity which is using this data. So that is control 1. So update this one, update there. We also do a notify update change. As the notify update change is called, the next thing it will do is it will at various points call get outputs, and that will update these two values. So that's the final bit. This bit, I'm sorry for missing out earlier. We comes in to get a, we call notify change, notify output changed, and then the page comes back and says, please give me the output values, and it returns those two values. Okay. Now let's move on. So if I actually swap this over. So having updated the entity form, entity control, the view control uses has as an input this select view, this select view entity, this select view PCF component has as an input the entity value. So if we look in the control manifest here, we have got the view as the main bound field, and underneath it we have got the entity as an input, which is likewise the single line text. It is of type, it is of usage input rather than bound. If it was a bound control, it has to be set to be attached to a attribute value on a for entity. If it is an input, you can override that with a piece of text. That string can only be 100 characters long. It is a long-standing bug within the PCF component. I'm not sure when it's going to be fixed. But in this case, it will. In this case, it is a input field, which means you could, in theory, say, just show me this value, or only show me this view. Only show me the views that are connected to the entity I specified, which could be contact, it could be activity pointer, it could be anything else. So, this control, beyond that, is no different to the controls I've shown you, apart from one item, which is it has a dependency. So we run through init when the form's loaded, and it is no different to how it was earlier. It works the exact same way. There's no difference in code here at all compared with the version I showed you for select entity. It's loaded once when the page loads, it's called, that's it, never to be seen again. Update view is again called when the page is loaded. So when the page is loaded the first time round, it runs through this piece of code and it runs. If this is first run, I will pull the value as it was presented into the system, and I will use that to when I populate the control. But it also has a different bit of logic here, which is if I'm running the second time round and I'm being triggered because the value of the entity is changed. So, which is this logic here, which is I have the newly import, this line here gives me, please give me the current value from the entity input parameter. And this line here says, if the current new value is different to the existing value, and this new value isn't blank, then we run as appropriate. Either if it's the first time round, we take the current value and we use it, and we mark it as this first run false, or because the entity above has changed, the value I have is no longer relevant and I set the value to be blank. Okay, because if I switch over this form and say we move, say I change here and I change it from contact to appointment, the view which we were using that related to the contact is not relevant to the appointment entity, because the view was attached to a contact that was attached to a contact. We set that value to be blank, and that's the purpose of that line there. And then the rest of this code is identical to how it was before. What the logic here is very simple. It is within this one line here, handle input value is changed, of the input value from attribute 1 is changed. That triggers the update view of this entity because one of the input parameters has changed. With the input value changed, this code needs to run, and I need to reset this value back to be blank, and we run everything else through. And this operates all the way through the form. You can have this however many hierarchies you want. You can use this across multiple controls at the same time. At all these points, what you're doing is you're ensuring that as I process value 1, as value 1 changes, the system as a whole will pass in the new updated value into all these controls. And you need to ensure that as this value changes, you handle that change. So in all these pages, the logic's the same. I've changed the entity value of 1, the value or the basis of the value in this control is no longer relevant. So you set it to be blank, and you then run this control as you would do first time round. So whatever logic you do to generate the list of records you're going to display, you run afresh. And that's it. So by doing this, I've gone from, I think it was about 10,000 lines of JavaScript we used to have to control this logic. I mean, it was TypeScript, but it was large, and there was some hideous bits where to enable you to select an entity, we had to create an option set which had 1,000 items in it, and we then had to populate all those items using entity names, and that was what we used to give us that select list. Now what we have is literally, here's a select box, here's a list of values, we treat it as a string, we process it, and then underneath we have, here's a set of values. I can pull it up from the previous one because I have an input value. I don't have any JavaScript that I need to do this. I can just use the input. The page itself brings it through to the next value, brings it down into the next entity or into the next attribute, and that attribute can handle it all itself. So I've gone from thousands of lines of JavaScript to literally 50, 60 lines of TypeScript and one bit of functionality. And that is this bit here. It's the view, check the views changed, check the input parameters changed. If the input parameters changed, handle that change in input parameter, and we're done. And I think that's it. So let's move back here. Let's move back there. Then we'll go questions. I hope I haven't lost everyone. It's very hard doing this when you haven't actually
Thank you once again.
It's very hard doing this when you haven't got faces in front of you.
Yes, Ben. There is a question from Parasathani.
Yep.
He has a question related to basically he's asking, is it possible to build a banner control use case downtime announcement to leverage the control in Dynamics? It should display on top regardless of anywhere we navigate. Hence, it should not be bound to any
you can't.
entity.
Okay. It's hideous because you have to do tricks. Okay. So I'll go in the background to how that stuff works. You need to add a hidden button at the app level. So that's Ribbon Workbench. Yeah, I can't remember exactly where in Ribbon Workbench it is, but you create on the application level a button. That is a custom button which requires JavaScript. Okay. You then need to run the logic on enable. So as I said, with you're on Ribbon Workbench, your options are either trigger when pressed, but actually you don't want to run it you don't want to run it when the button is pressed because you don't want the button to appear. You have to run it on the logic which says, do I show this button? Yes, no. And so you run it on that, and if you run it there, you can do it. Okay, so you're going to have in the background a pile of JavaScript to run it, to call it, and everything else. Or you can just wait a couple of weeks. This will be an app source and it will do it for you. But there are issues, as I said, there are issues with global notifications at the moment because you cannot see if they've been dismissed or not. Okay, there's no programmatic way of knowing it. The only way you know it's been displayed But if someone dismisses it, you don't know, and you also need to ensure that you don't try and display it every time, because as I discovered when I first started trying to play around with that logic, you can get the same notification appearing 420 times every time you load a form up. So yes, you can do it. You have to cheat to do it, and I wouldn't recommend it personally. But I'll also tell you, but there will be a nicer, easy way of doing it in the near future. So come and grab it. It'll be an app source probably in about a fortnight or so.
So there is a question: if you could share your GitHub URL, that'd be really good.
Yeah,
Great. The next question is: can we have an alert if the contact, not GDPR, is being added to a marketing list via lookup, therefore to prevent it from being added, not using plugin?
I'm going to say, we're asking questions not about so much about PCF, but we're asking marketers and sales stuff about components. So let's see, we got marketing list. You want to know if you could have an alert which says this person will not accept marketing. It's not so easy. There's no easy way of preventing it being saved at the moment. You might be able to do it with Bendix code later on today. But the generation of alert will be, this is, you could be done. This account is X, and you're on a marketing list form. I don't know offhand. I'll have to look through the steps. So mail me directly. I'll have a look and I'll come back to you.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question is, trying to scour for questions here. If there are any questions, please feel free to unmute your microphone and ask. Is anybody who has any other questions? Can't seem to see any other questions here.
Hi there, I have a question.
Yep.
Hello.
Hi, I have created my first PCF control for a data set. But I find every time the page is resized, I'm getting a lot of white space below it. And I just don't know if it's something I've missed, or maybe just the page resizing is just adding the white space.
The page resize will trigger an update view request. So as I said, continually, every time when you change the page view, it will call update view and everything else. I suspect you've got something in the rendering of a data grid which isn't being triggered when it runs second or third time round. So you've got update views run the first time round, it renders the page with it's rendering within the space available. And then the second, third time round, it's not updating what's been rendered. Is the page getting bigger or the page getting smaller when
when the page gets bigger, I get more white space.
Yeah, so you need to regenerate the HTML.
Thank you so much.
yeah, it's an obvious one, but it's not. Yeah, it's why I've got this step in which says, is it first run? Yes, no, because you need to handle all the updates and everything else, but you just need to handle them in different ways. So
great, thank you very much. I'll take a look at that.
Anything else?
Okay, well, that looks like the last. So that was the last question. Once again, thanks again, Ben. That's a very good session for this audience, highly relevant. So thanks for addressing the nuances. Bill Gates, by the way, has joined us. So there is one final question from Bill Gates. And the question is, do you use your browser DevTools to check the DOM elements of your PCF control?
Continually.
And then he's asking,
continually.
to go further, he's asking, here we go. Yep. Here we go. So to identify cause of the white space. Oh, sorry, that was Bill. Bill giving advice to Natalie, I believe. Sorry, my mistake. Silly for me to think Bill Gates did not know, was asking a question. But yeah, he was giving advice there. So thanks again, Bill Gates. And but moreover, thank you again, Ben, for that very enlightening session, sharing all your pains and experience, which is what is the most valuable to the community. So it saves them from the grey hairs and so we really do appreciate you for sharing your your experiences. So thanks again, Ben. Yes, so I think we're at the end of the event. Do you have any final messages for the community before we switch to the next session, Ben?
Never put me under that. Never actually force me to think about stuff I find. No, it's not scary. PCF components are actually very easy to write. So please go and try and create one. And
Ben has shared his GitHub link there. So thanks once again, Ben. It's always great to have you. Yes, next up is Baris. So Baris Kanlika, Baris, are you there?
Yeah. Now let's remember how to. There we are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Baris. Thank you once again for joining us for your second session. So Baris was with us